Well, that's annoying. I literally just fumbled the way I was holding this and it fell and stopped. Whatever. Anyway, so, but he's clearly a prophet. And Jesus says that he's Elijah in another, I forget what gospel it is. So, that he was, the Elijah that was supposed to come and all that. So we can't just go by just that. But anyway, so I was like, oh, I was feeling bad about my little revelation, but I still think I'm right. So anyway, so then after that, that's when I went back and just started from Genesis. And I didn't really like retain, like, I don't know, Genesis was pretty much picked clean. I pretty much didn't really get anything like super new from that, but like reading Exodus, which I'm pretty sure I'd never read like the entirety of Exodus all the way through, and so like in one sitting. So that was real interesting, and just listening to God, just listening to the whole thing. And there's actually a couple of really interesting tidbits that I have written down. So first of all, okay, I think I said in a previous video about Caleb being a Gentile, like the two spies that went into the land. It's like Caleb and Joshua, and Caleb was a Gentile. I didn't really find anything specifically that said that, because I don't know if maybe like his dad was and his mom wasn't or something, but it was like, it said that he was from the tribe of Judah or whatever. But then somewhere else, like it says that his dad was just called him like a Kenizzite or something. But that doesn't mean that, it doesn't say like exactly. And he could just be like, I mean, who knows what that means? It could still be Hebrew from that. So I didn't find much support for that. So I have to recant that, I guess. But I did find out that Joshua is not Joshua's name. He was renamed Joshua by Moses. Did you know that? I didn't really know that. I don't really talk about that much. So I think his real name was like Hoshea or something like that. But like Moses renamed him Joshua. That's super cool, right? And then another little tidbitty thing that that I think we forget is that like when they went through the desert, there was two ways, and I think people hear about like shouldn't have taken them 40 years to go through the desert. It was only this long, this many days journey or whatever. But and then sometimes they talk about there's this other way that they could have gone to get there that would have been faster, and it literally says like that God could have taken them through the Philistines' land, but he didn't want to do that because they would have had to fight, and they would have to fight the Philistines, and he didn't think that they would be willing to do that, and was 100% right. But it was really interesting, just that whole dynamic of like people like to characterize the way that God did this whole thing, and the Israelites came and took other people's land and blah blah blah. But like one thing I definitely saw over the course of the Old Testament, especially since it's like covering hundreds of years, is that this taking and retaining of land is happening constantly. And it literally doesn't matter, because that's just what it is. Like, that's just the nature of it, and that's just what's going to happen. So he wasn't saying like that he was going to have them destroy the Philistines. It was that as soon as they went through the Philistines' land, they were going to be in a fight because the Philistines lived there. So that's just what it is. It wasn't Israel in particular starting fights and everybody is just peaceful. It's not like now where there's such a thing called Germany, and then you have immigrants come through Germany and then they become citizens, and then there's a visa program. It's like, no, we're not doing all that. We're just going to come kill you. It's like, no, everyone had territories and you had to fight to get territory. Is there a could a case be made of like find your own land where no one is at? Maybe, kind of, but I mean, if no one is at that land, it's probably because it's not habitable or something. And also, Moses, or not Moses, but it was Abraham's land a long time ago. So, everybody's calling dibs at different parts of time. And like even in Genesis, even God like lays out like, here, you're gonna go here, you're gonna go there. I mean, it don't get no more legitimate land right than God literally telling you, like, this is all yours, this is you, this is you. But that's another millennia before this happens. So so yeah, it just went back and forth, and then they went in. Eventually, they died in the desert. Then their children got up, and they got the land, and they held it for a while, and then they forgot God, and then some other people came. Then their the border people, the people that they didn't drive all the way out, the people they didn't totally get rid of, the people that they made treaties with that they shouldn't have. That just caused problems for centuries. And they kept going back and back and forth, and they would get a little, and then when they would get it back, and then they would get it taken, and this and that. So anyway, so that was interesting. That it's very well established that whatever they were going to get, they were going to have to fight for, especially since they were basically a brand new group propping up out of nowhere. Egypt had probably been firmly established by then. I'm sure they were enjoying a little nice little peaceful whatever. Nobody bothered them. And then you've got this people group who just suddenly just exists. It's like, well, where are they gonna go? So aside from it being God's plan of how do multiple things at one time, like that is just like the nature of reality back then. And then another thing that I really understood, as far as like what everything that God was trying to do, the common thread through the giving of the law and all of the trials and all of the things that they went through, it was like these people were slaves, which meant that they had never had autonomy before. Not only had they never had autonomy, but they didn't know anything about this God. And so God was teaching them about having a fear of God, having a fear of the Lord, which people still don't really understand in this day and age. They do, they just don't know that they do, because God has still done a really good job with this. And honestly, I think people like to push it out to its extremes and make it seem more like extreme than it is, just to be difficult so they don't have to deal with it. But we all know that even when we joke around, it's like when you see a TikTok or you see, you're making fun of a handicapped person or whatever, and everybody's like in the comments, like, y'all are going to get me sent to hell. You're going to get me struck by lightning or this and that. And we laugh about it. That is showing an understanding of a fear of God, which they had none of. And so they really had to start from scratch. So the fear of God is basically like God being like, listen, there's just some things that, if I'm going to hang around and be your God and stuff, like, there's some things that just we can't be doing, because it'll literally, you'll die. Something bad will happen. And so, you have this thing where, yeah, when everything is going good, it's going great. They're winning battles easily. God is giving them victories. They're seeing amazing things. But when it's not going good, then it's not going good, and there's plagues breaking out, and people are falling down dead, and the earth is swallowing up people and all of this stuff. So, so yeah, I definitely, it's almost like that whole thing with the calf. I mean, because I was very early in the whole situation. And, at that time, Moses was basically the only one who was talking to God and sort of mediating on everyone's behalf. And so, there was grumbling from the jump. They grumbled throughout the whole process, from literally from the first plague to them all dying in the desert. Like, they just grumbled and complained. It was so hard for them. They never got used to God. They never got used to, like, okay, he's probably going to pull this one out for us. Like, I don't know, probably after, for me, like after I saw the Red Sea like go up for everyone to cross, I think I would probably just relax after that, personally. Maybe not, I don't know. I mean, at least that. I mean, 3 days of darkness is pretty amazing, but it was all, I imagine that it was all very like just the way that people are now, where they think, okay, well, God's going to do something immediately. Like a real God would just raise up, would just get up and resolve this whole thing in one whop. And, you know, if we're honest, we still don't get it. We don't get why not, he doesn't do anything like that. But you should get that that's how he is, and you either love it or hate it. But it's like, he's not. You should know by now that he's not going to just fix it all in one, wrap it all up in one neat whole thing. Because there's other stuff that you don't know about that has to be done, and just there's a way that he wants to do it. He clearly was doing it. He has a fixation on because it's like, if he's going to go in the desert and just get just a random, start with one man and have it branch out from there, if that's going to be his calling card, like, he can't have you getting the victory because y'all are mass in number and strong and brave and intelligent and all of these factors that could be, it's like everybody feared the Israelites when they were in the desert, not because it's like these people were slaves. They didn't know anything about conquering nations or being, they were conquered for centuries. It couldn't have been them. And that's another thing that I saw over and over and over, the theme of just like God really preferring for you to get out of the way entirely, so that he could do it all, because he's trying to show people. And that was another thing, interesting thing. Like, I don't think we understand the pagan mind, or just the God worshiping life. It's just really impossible. Like, we're just so steeped in the modern world, we really can't understand having all of this tied to deities, and just him being one of many deities. And they would acknowledge him. The other countries would acknowledge him for what he had did, for whatever, it was just whoever the god that they were worshiping. It was just, that was his style, was to do it like this and that. But they had gods that they worshipped, and those gods did other things that weren't that. And none of them ever like switched over to the most powerful god. Like, I don't know, I'm sure there were some, because there was laws about aliens in the land and people who wanted to become Hebrew and all this stuff. But for the most part, people just worshipped the ones that they had grown up worshiping, or the local whatevers. And the Israelites' God was their God. And they never really, um, every once in a while they would be like, ooh, their God did such and such and such. Like, that's wild. Like, but it never went further than that. So that was interesting. And, um, but yeah, just like all the different things about the fear of the Lord. And it's not just like, you better run because I'm going to get you. Like, it was like I remember in Joshua, once they got to Joshua, and you got this whole other generation, which is also very interesting, completely different, um, sort of perspective. Like, they just didn't have near the same type of problems that the previous generation did. But always, there was always a through line. But, when he says, like, okay, you're going to go into, it wasn't Jericho, it was the one after Jericho, I forget. I think it's like AI or something. And you're gonna go and you're gonna sack the city and you're gonna destroy everything and don't leave anything, whatever, destroy it all. And by this time, they knew the routine, they knew the deal, they knew about the fear of the Lord. They'd seen the plagues, they'd seen the this, they'd seen the that. That don't matter. It's always somebody, right? So we know by this time that God means what he's talking about. But one dude, he saw a bunch of gold and a bunch of silver and this tight looking robe. And he was like, yo, that robe. And he had to keep it. And what's even more annoying is like, he like buried it underneath his tent. So you can't even enjoy the thing that you stole. So, or that he didn't steal it. It didn't belong to anybody, but God said destroy it, and he didn't. So, but nobody knows about it. It just, and it's really actually interesting how the Bible tells that story, because it doesn't tell you anything about that guy. It just says like, well, actually, no, I think it does. But it's like, go up and do this thing. Well, then they go to fight and they lose the battle. And it's not a good battle to lose because they've already got Jericho and they've got this trajectory. But it's like when you're out there and you're following God and God is giving you the victory, God has to keep giving you the victory. Like, because you're just out here making a big stink and everybody's like, what's going on? So if you don't have God on your side, you're just going to you've already like made this whole dust up. So God's got to stay with you and finish it and protect you. Otherwise, you're just out here. So they lose the battle and everyone's freaked out. Joshua is freaked out. Joshua goes and he finds, he goes into the tent and talks to God. And he's like, yo, like what's going on? We have to win every single last battle or we're going to get creamed out here. Like, what happened? What did we do? And God's like, someone kept the things like that I told you to destroy. And it's like this teaching of like, listen, you got to follow everything to a T if this is going to go down. And it's not so much that God is like a stickler. It's like, this is about his holiness. Like, God's presence can't exist with you secretly. It's like, it's just, no, you can't do it like that. So one guy in a camp thought he could, it wouldn't be a big deal. And also like, you got to carry it out to its end. Like, okay, let's imagine everyone has the same thought. Well, God's not going to care if I just take this one thing. And everyone's doing that. It's not, then it's a completely unholy, tainted place. So you got to have fear of the Lord. Like, you got to know, like, this is not something that you can compromise on. And I think even now, like, we think, well, all of that stuff is, we're sitting back, like none of that matters anymore. But I think we simply do not realize that, a lot of, we have done a lot of those things in the modern world and we don't realize the consequences because we've got all of these things that sort of can mask the consequences of what we've done. But like, even just like how men are just, they can't find wives and just the whole thing is a mess. And it's like, yeah, well, you sold yourselves into prostitution, I don't know, maybe like 50 years ago. Did you think maybe that wasn't gonna like, I heard something really interesting or really like deep about, it was like, you women are you're having to spend more to get so much less. It's like what your grandma used to do, like when she got married, like whatever her duties were, or like just the bare minimum. It's just like how gas was 30 cents and your grandma knew how to bake, sew, cook, and all of these things. And she wasn't even a 10 or nothing. She was just, grandma. Her name was Edna. She looked like an Edna. And you got all of these things from her. And she raised your kids and you stayed together forever. But it's like people thought that was boring and trash and that had to be more out there. So then they started going out and exploring and doing and waiting until they were whatever, until they had done all this stuff to get to settle down. Now you gotta like basically spend your whole life or take every single penny that you have earned as a man. Like, you got to be a six-figure guy. You get someone who's attractive, but not really. She's wearing a ton of makeup. She's never going to show you her real face. She doesn't know how to do anything because she's an independent woman and she's not gonna. And she's slept with 15 people. And she's so much more expensive than Grandma Edna was back in the day. It's like, that's not all like, oh, well, that's just, the trajectory. We'll put it on its chart and make it scientific. It's like, no, it seems scientific because God will not be mocked and sowing and reaping is real. So yeah, you probably could put a chart to it because that is how, whatever, it's going to happen. I should have prayed over the second video too, huh? So anyway, so I noticed that that a lot of the things that they were going through was God teaching them the fear of the Lord, and which they didn't quite master. The first generation certainly did not, and then even after Joshua, there's a pretty famous verse that's usually in songs and on pillows and stuff about choose ye this day whom you will serve. And as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Sometimes they're broken up into two different themed things. And I was surprised to see where that was, which is basically after, Joshua had, done the whole thing and they got into the promised land and all that stuff. There was this, it was like a rededication thing of like, do you still want to serve this God? Or no, like say it now if you're still not in. And they're like, no, yeah, totally, we're in. Like, he just did all the stuff for us. But it's just really interesting. Like, it was almost like God was saying, like, you can back out now if you want. Like, make your decision now, even after he had done all that stuff. So it was this multiple asking them if they still were going to do this. And another interesting thing was like towards the beginning, like when they were in the wilderness and Moses, was going up to speak to God and his face was like bright. And there's at one point, like God comes down on Mount Sinai, or like he shows up like in a cloud and he's like rumbling. He's like talking and it's like rumbling and thunder. And they're like, listen, we can't take this right here. Moses, if you want to just talk to God and just let us know what he says, because we're going to die. And which I thought was really interesting. I'm like, what was that like? Like, it didn't seem like anybody was in danger or whatever. They were just scared to death, I guess. I don't know. And then to keep trying that God over and over. I mean, I don't know. We all do it, right? So whatever. But but at one point it said that God appeared to Moses and something about he had this like jasper it was like jasper under his feet, like it was like a platform that was like the jewel, like a blue, I don't know. Anyways, so but like the elders, there was like 70 elders or something, or people under Moses that he had appointed, and I don't know if they had like snuck up the mountain or how they managed to see that, but they apparently like caught a glimpse of this. And it said like the 70 elders like saw God like standing before Moses talking to Moses, but they didn't die. It was like this kind of cool moment of like they tried to go backstage and saw something they shouldn't have saw and managed to not die. And it was like, so that happened. Like it just had to like write down like how they survived that. Like God didn't kill him because God already like told him like, listen, you can't see my face, like you'll die and this and that. And I don't think that was him like not keeping his promise. It was just like, I don't know, there's something either probably in their motivation or something pure about it that allowed them to be able to stay alive. Because um if we're talking about loopholes, and I don't think it's necessarily loopholes, it's just like with your own parents. Your parents find out you lied about something, or they find out you did something, and there's something in that interaction that just simply isn't punitive. It's just like, not so much that you're lenient on them, you're like, let them go. It's just like, it's actually, it turns out to technically not even have anything wrong with it, kind of thing. I don't know. But I could see why that happened. But it was just interesting. And oh yeah, another thing is like, so then I started reading and I got into Judges. And I had to write this list. I should have wrote a list like as I was reading, but I didn't. So this is kind of like my pre-chewed everything that I could possibly remember. But I got to Gideon, which is like, I don't know, for some reason, it's one of those judges that it doesn't really stick in my mind for some reason. I don't know. But they low-key like tried to make him king. And so he was like in the middle, or maybe like in the last portion of Judges that there were. And yeah, they tried to make him king, and he was like, "No, I'm not gonna be king. Like God is gonna appoint your king or whatever." And I think like because I'm pretty sure that it then went into another story, and a lot of times these people have like multiple names, so it seemed to me that there was another name that they were using for Gideon, and that he had 70 sons. I'm pretty sure it was Gideon that they were talking about. Or was it 70? That seems like a lot now. But like one of the sons like killed the rest of them so he could be the next person in line. So it was like they were trying to start up a king thing, but it just wasn't time for it, and like he ended up dying. Well, and then I got to Samson. Lord of mercy. Wow. So reading Samson just like in 2023 was just like, yo, this is really like amazing. First of all, I didn't realize he's kind of basically the last real judge that they had in Israel, until we get to Samuel, and then eventually like he anoints the king or whatever. But I didn't realize that at that point they had sinned, and I think they had been under Philistine rule for like 40 years or something. I feel like it was a long Philistine rule. So they were occupied, basically, when he became the judge. And, a couple of times, like it was like the peoples that came in and ruled them were just so harsh. And that's the only thing that made them cry out to God. Because it's like they would get prosperous or whatever, if things would be peaceful, and then they would, la di da. That's not related to God at all. So then they would just kind of, or your dumb kids get born, and they, after 40 years, they don't care. They're taking it all for granted or whatever. And so that's what happened. And so he raises up, and so that's part of the reason why he was such a different judge, is because the Philistines basically were occupying, and so it was very warlike. I was wondering why, like, I mean, he's just such a weird, he didn't really seem to like, because some of the judges were literal judges, and they, settled disputes and like judged things, and he just seemed to just kill people. Well, that was because that, they were under the thumb. Like, I don't know, I'm trying to put this in the context of what that would have been like. Like, they were not in power at the time. Like, they didn't, to the point where, like, the Spirit of the Lord comes on him and he kills all of these Philistines. And, the Judah, I think, goes to him and says, listen, we're going to hand you over to them. Like, we don't want any of the smoke. Like, and he's like, well, just don't kill me. Like, they're like, no, we're just going to tie you up and then we're just going to hand you over to them. Cause like, they are mad because you're killing everybody. And we don't really like you that much to deal with them. Like, we're going to give them to you. We won't kill you. So that was the time. But I'm telling you, the rapture thing, the rapture senses were like all over the place because, people are now finding the parallels between, the brides, the Gentile brides, and all of this stuff. And Samson had been brought up before. And so, yeah, but reading it, going through it line by line was just like, are you freaking serious? So there's this whole Gentile bride thing. And the fact that Ruth was basically a Gentile bride. And oh, and then like all the women in the genealogy, like the women in the genealogy were like all Gentiles or something. Like, I think Rahab's in the genealogy, Ruth's in genealogy. I forget the other one, although Mary's not a Gentile. But I don't know, is she? But whoever, there's only like 3 or 4 women in the genealogy. And I was blown away by Ruth when I realized, like, oh my gosh, she is so not even a Jew and she's got her own freaking book. That is amazing. I'm not even Jewish and I know that's amazing. But like, then there's this whole thing about Leah and Rachel. Okay. So even though, I don't know if you're probably not even watching all the videos, so you don't even know what I'm talking about. And even if you did know what I was talking about, you're probably like barely following it. So, okay. Revelation 12 sign in the sky, right? Bunch of different constellations, stars, really interesting stuff. People are finding new stars every single day, and they all seem to be biblically related in some way, whether it is a literal biblical name or it has a meaning that means like to go up or the bride or, the sun that goes up or whatever. It's always just something that's like, you got to be kidding me. Or that you put the number of the comet or the asteroid or whatever it is in Strong's and you get like, which shouldn't even be possible. Like, why do they all have like 4 numbers, which is the Strong's numbers? Why isn't it 5 numbers? Why isn't it 3 numbers? Like, it's just crazy. So anyway, so someone found Leah in the stars, like the star named Leah, and these are all named at different times in the world. So they could have found Leah in 1975 and named it that. And, it's not Leah, it's called Leah Marie or something like that. Well, and guess what else? In 2030, Leah Marie is not there anymore. Instead, Rachel is there. I mean, I don't know. I'm not making it up. It's in the sky. Okay. So Jacob, who, AKA Israel, had 2 wives. One was Leah, one was Rachel. Really sad story that always like, is close to my heart about Leah because she wasn't loved by him. He loved Rachel, but, Laban deceived him and made him marry Leah first and then made him work 7 more years for Rachel, who is the bride that he wanted. And there's all this Leah Rachel thing going on. And so, which at first was like, so that makes the church Leah, like, but it makes sense that, that would make Israel Rachel, and that totally checks out. But it's not like we're not going to be like loved by God or whatever, but I'm just like, oh. But I literally feel like, I don't know, I just feel a kinship with Leah. And I don't know. And so she had the most sons because God opened her womb when he saw that she wasn't loved. And so it's, whatever. It's all nice stuff. But it's just like, I would much rather her just be loved by her husband. Like, can she just get some love? What's up, Jacob? So anyway, but the heart wants what it wants, blah, 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 right? Why did I read in Samson? And we've already been over Samson's Gentile bride. So he had a Gentile bride. He was like obsessed with this chick, right? Why did first he sees the bride? He's like, get me the bride, the Philistine, the Gentile bride. I want the Gentile bride. And everybody's like, are you sure? Because it's like tension. It's tense. It's like, can't you find somebody from your relatives like that aren't at war with us? And he's like, no, I want her. So he goes to get her. There's this whole thing about a riddle. He tells like her people, he goes to visit her and her people and tells this riddle. And they are like, they can't figure out the riddle. So then they go to her and they like threaten her. They're like, you better find out this riddle or whatever. Cause he had like made a bet and they had to give him a bunch of stuff. And so she goes to him and she's like, why have you, whatever? Like, I don't know. There's this whole thing about like using women against him, but whatever. So she ends up finding out the riddle. She cries. She puts on the tears. He tells her the riddle. She goes back and tells them what it is. And so he finds out, like, whatever. And then they fight because he's just like, whatever. They fight. Okay. So then after that, and I don't know what the bride thing is. Like, there's this whole procedure when you're going to get married. You don't like shack up right away or do all this stuff. Like, there's a whole process and it takes time. So he goes back up to go get her or whatever. Well, her dad says, oh, well, I thought you hated her or whatever. So I gave her to, like, he literally says, I gave her to your friend. Like, I gave her to somebody else. Like, why don't you take the younger, her sister, her younger sister? Like, she's more prettier and blah, blah, blah. Samson's like, I got a better idea. How about I tie a torch to these foxtails and set all your whole shebang on fire? How about I do that? Like, I don't know, dude. I think it's one of those you have to be there, but if you could get the gist at all, it's pretty great. But like, he was mad. But I was like, wait, she had a sister that was younger, like. And the dad was like, take her. He's like, I don't know. It's just like, what is going on? So anyway, also, I did not know that the first judge ever was like Caleb's younger brother. Like, because Caleb and Joshua, they both lived very long because they had to be young when they spied out the land. Then they had to live for 40 years. Or I don't know, maybe they were adult because Caleb, like, once they took over, like, everyone got wiped out and died in the wilderness. Then they went and they took the promised land. And then Caleb was like, listen, God has preserved my strength all these years. So I'm just as strong as I was when we spied it out. Like, so he fought, like, he was like 87 years old. And so when Joshua died, they would have had to go into the promised land. I guess, I don't know how much longer Joshua died. Maybe died like 20 years later or something. Well, the first judge was Caleb's youngest brother, which was kind of interesting. And like, you could kind of see that there wasn't really a king thing going on with that either, because Moses had sons, but the sons weren't next in line after Moses. It was Joshua who was like his aide. Like, he was mentioned very early on in the story. So it wasn't passing down genealogically by then either. So that was all very interesting to me. And then and then I just had some stuff that I was worrying about, like this ephod thing, because after Samson, there's this really bizarre story about an ephod and the priest, and I don't know, something about this ephod. Like, they worshipped this ephod. Like it literally said Gideon had made one and they were worshiping it. So there's something I like. They used the ephod to make decisions. I think like they would ask God things, and I don't know, it would like light up or do something. So what it seems to me is that they started just imbuing the ephod itself with magical powers or something, and they like sort of took God out of it. But it doesn't really. It's not really you know, I just think that that's just a natural thing of like so much time has passed, you can't really convey to the future generations like things that you think they ought to always know. So that kind of got lost. So, but all you got to do is like kind of do a deep dive and you'll usually get some understanding of that. But like, I was like, yo, what's up with this ephod? And what was also interesting, and like the priest wore the ephod or something, right? Like he was the one that, I think it was the priest, or was it the Levite? I think it was a priest, because I remember I just like did a search on ephod and then I saw that like um David wore a linen ephod at one point, and I was like, yo, because there's this whole thing about him being a priest, kind of, or him just being a type of Christ. And so there's a linen ephod, and then there's one that's like gold, that's like the legit one with like stones in it and stuff. I don't know. I literally read it all, but I mean, I was loosely listening to how it's like, here's how you make it, blah, 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 blah. This is what it does. So I have to go back and check that out. And then, I don't know, there's also this thing about like killing animals privately. Like Samson killed a lion. David killed a bear and a lion. Like, I'm just like, what is this? What does this mean of the private, the killing of animals and not telling anybody that you did it? It's like, it's interesting. So yeah, that unfortunately is all I remember from all of my from reading the entire Old Testament, but just stuff that was just like not the usual thing that you hear all the time. It's just like things that stood out to me before. I was like, oh. But I literally am gonna just read it again because it's just the only thing I feel like doing. Like I'm just so ready to get out of here, and reading the Bible is the only thing that like makes me feel like I'm there. It's that kind of. So I'm like, okay, let's go read the freaking measurements of the freaking temple, because I do not want to be here and I don't know what else to do in my life. Like, so, oh, and then I read Revelation, like right after that, like I had it on random, which was kind of new. So it went straight into Revelation after, I don't know, something, Judges or something, or whatever the last thing I read. And I was just like, my brain was really fried from that. I was like, dude. And that, like, I listened to all the way through too, which I don't think I've ever done that. So reading 22 chapters of Revelation right together, I was just like, okay. Like, you read sections of it and you read pieces of it. So I read the whole thing and I was like, and then I'm trying to apply it to like the current situation. I'm just like, and I'm starting to think, I'm like, you know what? I don't think that the rapture or the result of the rapture is really even, I don't think he shows it to John, even though there's a whole thing about a multitude in heaven and all of this stuff. We go, oh, that's the rapture, that's the saints or whatever. And then, but it says that those are the saints that come out of the great tribulation. And then it's like, it's in trouble. Oh, where's my, and the one thing that stuck out to me was after Jesus says, write this to all the churches, and he does that. Then he says, then after this, he's like, like come up from here and I'll show you what happens after this. And I'm like, dude, why is that preposition right there? After what? After what? So that really stuck in my mind for the first time, because usually you're just skimming it because you're just like, I'm trying to get any grasp of anything. But I was like, what happens after this? So you got finished writing all of these letters to churches. After you write the letters or after churches? Like, you wrote all the letters to the churches. Are the churches done now? Are you saying like, let me show you what happens after the church? I'm done with the churches. So now I'm like, is everything after that like post rapture? Like he doesn't show him the rapture? Because like I heard somebody else bring up like why is there who is the 24 elders? Like why what are they like those are clearly like they're pretty it's pretty clear that they're human beings. How'd they get up there? What like how long have they been up there if the rapture hasn't happened yet? Or has the rapture happened yet and they are there? And it's just like a really a lot of people there. It does say there's lots of angels there. But if we're really just going by like we don't know what and why God is showing John what he's showing him. So um while the the saints show up that are beyond number, that could be the raptured people, or not necessarily raptured people, just like the dead in Christ and all that. I mean, for it to be like beyond number, like uncountable number. I'm thinking, okay, that's everybody with a new body. That's got to be the dead in Christ. It's got to be like the rapture, like everybody. And maybe it's not necessarily in order because then it talks about like there's a part where it talks about Jesus on the Mount of Olives with 144,000, and then it stops that, and then it goes on to like signs in the heaven and stuff like that. So I'm like, I don't know, and then it picks up, and then it goes back to him returning. So, and then it stops for a minute and talks about this lady on the beast for a while, and then it goes like really in depth on that, and then it comes out of that, and so no one. That's why it's really confusing because visions are confusing anyways, just in their nature. But then when you have it all written out and you pour over it, it's just like and you're trying to like put some structure to it. It's like, is it linear? Like and like I do think it is linear in general. You know, especially when you've got like so like the Lamb of God opening the seals. Obviously, he's opening the seals in order. But also, I was thinking about this the other day. I'm like, well, maybe it's all happening like pretty much at the same time, but it takes some time to like describe what happens when you open the first seal and then what happens when you open the second seal. No, it's like you have a whole chapter describing what happens when you open one seal. Then it's like then it's the second one. It seems like it makes it seem like time is going on, but it could just be popping them things. Like, okay, I have to go. It's literally been I'm overtime and it's just now I'm just rambling. Okay. Thank you for listening. Bye.